My name is Scarlett Hayes. The first time my father called me a fraud, he was standing in a courtroom packed with strangers. His voice cracked through the silence, so hard that even the court reporters stopped typing. "That woman is not my daughter," he shouted, pointing directly at me. "She's a liar, a thief, an imposter wearing a uniform she never earned." I remember the smell of old wood polish and burnt courthouse coffee, the sharp sting of winter air still trapped in my coat, the weight of every eye turning toward me at once. Then my attorney slid a sealed envelope across the table. Dark blue seal, Pentagon insignia. The judge opened it slowly. Read one line, then another. And suddenly the entire room changed. He removed his glasses carefully and said in a voice so quiet it became terrifying, "Everyone in this courtroom will stand up right now." My father's face lost all color, and for the first time in my life, I watched him become afraid of me. I was born in a town where men like my father were treated like monuments. Cedar Hollow, Virginia, wasn't large enough for secrets to stay buried, but it was small enough for pride to live forever. My father, Richard Hayes, had spent 23 years as a military police officer before retiring with a ruined knee and a personality sharp enough to cut through steel. People respected him because he spoke like a man who'd survived something important. Maybe he had, but by the time I came along, whatever softness he once possessed had already dried up, especially toward women. "Girls need stability," he used to say, while watching my older brother Mason throw footballs in the yard. "Men need purpose." I was 8 years old the first time I understood I would never be enough for him. Mason crashed Dad's truck into a mailbox when he was 16. Dad laughed about it for years. I got a B+ in chemistry once. Dad didn't speak to me for 3 days. My mother, Victoria, tried to balance the house the way people hold together cracked glass with trembling fingers. She was warm where he was cold, gentle where he was rigid. She used to sneak into my room late at night and brush my hair behind my ear while I pretended to sleep. "You don't have to become hard to survive him," she whispered once. I didn't understand what she meant back then. I do now. By 17, I had already decided I was leaving Cedar Hollow, not for college, not for marriage, for the military. The day the acceptance letter from United States Military Academy arrived, my hands shook so badly I could barely open it. My mother cried before I even finished reading. "Oh my God," she whispered, covering her mouth. "Scarlett." But my father barely looked up from his dinner. "You'll wash out in 6 months." The room went silent. My mother stared at him. "Richard." "No," he interrupted, calmly, cutting into his steak. "She's stubborn, not strong. There's a difference." I remember sitting there in that tiny dining room with yellow wallpaper peeling near the ceiling, trying not to let him see how badly his words hurt me. Outside the window, summer rain tapped softly against the glass. Mason smirked into his mashed potatoes, and somehow that hurt even more. At West Point, I learned quickly that pain could become fuel if you let it. I learned how to run until my lungs burned raw, how to function on 4 hours of sleep, how to keep moving while men twice my size waited for me to fail. Some of them wanted me gone before I even opened my mouth. But there's a strange thing that happens when you spend enough time underestimated. You stop fearing people. During training, exercises in the mountains, I watched grown men collapse from exhaustion while I kept climbing. Not because I was stronger, because I'd spent my entire childhood learning how to survive emotional cold. Physical pain felt simpler, cleaner. When I graduated, my mother drove 9 hours just to see me receive my commission. My father never came. He claimed he had better things to do. Years later, I would learn he spent that weekend drinking with friends at a fishing cabin. Still, I served Germany first, then Kuwait, then assignments. Nobody in my family fully understood because I wasn't allowed to explain them. I missed birthdays, holidays, funerals, relationships that could have become marriages. Meanwhile, Mason drifted from one disaster to another. Failed business, DUI, gambling debt. Every time he crashed, my father caught him before he hit the ground. "That's my son," Dad always said, as if those 3 words explained everything. The older I became, the more my father seemed to resent me. Not openly at first, quietly, like a man bothered by something he couldn't control. He hated when people thanked me for my service. Hated when neighbors asked about my promotions. Once during Christmas dinner, a family friend congratulated me on making major. My father snorted into his whiskey. "Military is different now," he muttered. "Half of it's politics." The table went dead silent. My mother looked exhausted. That was the year I realized she'd spent most of her marriage apologizing for a man who never apologized for himself. Then she got sick. Pancreatic cancer. Fast, merciless, the kind that steals people in pieces while everyone pretends hope still exists. I took leave and stayed beside her hospital bed for nearly 6 weeks. At night, machines hummed softly in the dark while snow fell outside the windows. Sometimes she slept. Sometimes she held my hand without speaking. My father rarely stayed longer than 20 minutes. One evening after she fell asleep, he stood near the doorway staring at me. "You always needed attention," he said, flatly. I looked at him in disbelief. "She's dying, and somehow you still make it about yourself." That was the closest I ever came to hitting him. But my mother opened her eyes before I could respond. She looked terrified. Not of me, of what we'd become. She died 2 days later with my hand in hers. At the funeral, people told me she'd been proud of me, that she talked about me constantly, that she kept photos of me in uniform beside her bed. My father barely looked at me the entire day. After the burial, while distant relatives carried casseroles into the church basement, he finally approached me near the cemetery gates. Cold wind moved through the dead grass between us. "You stopped being my daughter," he said quietly the moment
I opened
you chose that uniform.
Rain hammered
against
the
windows while
I
my
stared at
coffee
him
grew
for several
cold
seconds
beside the sink.
certain
I
must
read the
have heard
first page
wrong.
once,
Then he walked
twice,
away.
then a third
Just like
time
that.
because my brain
3
refused
weeks
to
later,
accept the words.
I received
Richard
the court
Hayes
summons.
was suing me
I
for
was
my
standing
mother's
in my
house,
kitchen in
her
Arlington
savings,
when-
and nearly every asset she'd left behind. But it was the final sentence that hollowed out my chest. Claim filed under disputed paternity. According to my father, I wasn't his daughter at all. I didn't sleep the night I received the lawsuit. I sat alone in my kitchen while rain slid down the windows and silver streaks the papers spread across the table like evidence from someone else's life. Every few minutes, I reread the same sentence, hoping it would somehow rearrange itself into something less cruel. Disputed paternity. My father wasn't just trying to take my mother's estate. He was trying to erase me from the family completely. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, I finally called Mason. I don't know why. Maybe some foolish part of me still believed blood meant something. He answered on the 4th ring, sounding irritated. "What? You knew about this?" Silence, then a sigh. "Dad's doing what he has to do." I gripped the edge of the counter. He's claiming Mom cheated on him. So, the word hit me harder than shouting would have. So I repeated, "Scarlett, come on. Everybody knows you were always her favorite. Dad's sick of it. He deserves the house." I laughed once, short, disbelieving. "The house Mom paid for. You were never around." He snapped suddenly. "You don't know what things were like after you left." After I left. As if joining the military had been abandonment instead of survival. "You gambled away your own money," I said quietly. "Now you want hers too." His breathing changed. "That told me everything. You think you're better than us because you wear a uniform?" He muttered. "No," I answered. "I think Mom deserved better than this." He hung up. I stood there listening to the deadline for several seconds before lowering the phone slowly. Outside, thunder rolled across the Virginia sky, and for the first time in years, I cried for my mother instead of missing her. The lawsuit spread through Cedar Hollow faster than wildfire through dry grass. By the end of the week, former neighbors had already chosen sides. Some called quietly to offer sympathy. Others avoided me entirely. Then the local paper published the story. Decorated female officer accused in family fraud case. I stared at the article during lunch break inside the Pentagon. Cafeteria, unable to finish eating. Around me, conversations blended into meaningless noise. Trays clattered, coffee machines hissed. Somewhere nearby, a television played muted news coverage. My phone buzzed constantly. Old classmates, distant cousins, reporters. One message simply read, "Is it true your real father was another soldier?" I deleted it immediately. But humiliation has a way of settling into the body physically. It changes how you walk into rooms, how long you hold eye contact. Even at work, I began noticing subtle shifts in people's behavior. Questions lingered longer. Conversations stopped when I entered elevators. No one directly accused me of lying about my service, but suspicion moves quietly before it speaks aloud. And, because much of my record remained classified, I couldn't defend myself fully. That was the cruel brilliance of what my father had done. He understood just enough about military confidentiality to weaponize it. 3 days later, I drove back to Cedar Hollow to meet with the attorney recommended by an old colonel. Friend of mine. Her office sat above a hardware store on Main Street. The brass plaque outside the stairwell read, Evelyn Brooks, attorney at law. Inside smelled like old books and peppermint tea. Evelyn herself looked to be somewhere in her late 60s with silver hair pinned neatly behind her head and eyes sharp enough to cut through concrete. She didn't waste time with sympathy. "That man's dangerous," she said after reviewing the lawsuit. "He's my father." "No," she corrected calmly. "He's your opposing counsel's client. Learn the difference quickly." I almost smiled. Almost. For 2 hours, she reviewed documents while I explained family history piece by piece. Occasionally, she'd pause to underline something or scribble notes into the margins. Finally, she leaned back in her chair. "Your father's story has holes." "What kind of holes?" "The kind that make judges angry." She slid a document toward me. "A photocopy of my birth certificate. He filed a request challenging authenticity," she explained. "But county records show somebody already tried accessing and altering supporting files 6 months ago." I stared at her, altering. "Your father isn't just grieving, he's preparing." A cold heaviness settled into my stomach. Evelyn removed her glasses slowly. "Tell me about your military record." "There's not much I can discuss." "I know." Her voice softened slightly. "But if this reaches federal territory, surprises can destroy cases." I hesitated. For years, secrecy had become instinct. Some assignments remained classified. Even now, entire portions of my service record existed behind walls ordinary civilians would never see. "I served overseas," I said carefully. "That part one, no." "There were operations attached to diplomatic security." Her expression changed slightly. "What kind of operations?" "The kind nobody acknowledges publicly." Silence stretched between us. Outside the office window, I could hear a train horn somewhere in the distance. Evelyn folded her hands together. "Scarlett, is there anything protected under federal seal that could affect your identity or service verification?" Immediately, a memory surfaced. A locked briefing room. A colonel sliding a sealed envelope across a metal table years ago. "If your service record is ever challenged in civilian court," he had told me, "this goes through legal counsel only." At the time, I'd almost laughed. Who would challenge it? Now I understood. "I might have something," I said quietly. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "Might." I was instructed never to open it. "Unless absolutely necessary." Would this qualify as absolutely necessary? I thought about my father standing in court calling me a fraud. About my mother dying while he accused me of selfishness. About the headlines, the whispers, the humiliation. "Yes," the storage locker itself that evening, small, I drove to a secure storage facility outside Alexandria. Cold enough to see my breath. Low and gray above the very back sat an old heavy military footlocker covered in scratches lights from reflected across wet pavement like broken ribbons of color. I simply stared at it. So many years of my life lived inside silence. I unlocked it carefully. Inside were photographs, combinations, old uniforms, and beneath them a flat black document case. My pulse quickened immediately. The seal was still intact. Dark blue wax embossed with the Department of Defense insignia across the front stamped in red. Authorized only by federal order. My fingers hovered over it, without touching. Suddenly, the room felt much smaller. I remember the night I received it. The colonel's expression, the warning in his voice. Some documents protect information. Others protect people. I picked up the envelope slowly, and for the first time since the lawsuit began, I realized my father had absolutely no idea what he had started. The courthouse in Fairfax smelled like wet wool, burnt coffee, and old paper. By the time Evelyn and I arrived for the preliminary hearing, reporters had already gathered outside the entrance beneath a line of gray winter clouds. Camera shutters clicked the second I stepped out of the car. "Major Bennett, is your military record fabricated? Did your mother hide your real father? Are federal investigators involved?" Evelyn placed one steady hand against my elbow and guided me forward without slowing down. "Eyes ahead," she murmured. Inside the courthouse buzzed with quiet excitement. Small-town scandals rarely collided with military secrecy, and people could sense something ugly unfolding. I saw strangers whispering before I even reached the courtroom doors. Then I saw my father. Thomas Bennett stood near the front row in a dark suit that suddenly looked too large for him. Age had hardened him over the past few years. His shoulders seemed narrower now, but his eyes still carried the same cold certainty I remembered from childhood. Jake stood beside him, avoiding my gaze. For one brief second, I almost walked over there, not to argue, to beg. Some wounded part of me still wanted my father to look ashamed, to pull me aside and admit he'd gone too far to tell everyone this had been a mistake born from grief. Instead, He looked at me the way people look at enemies before battle, like someone preparing to win. You ready? Evelyn asked quietly. No, that's honest, she replied. Good. Honest people survive cross-examination better. We entered the courtroom. The hearing itself began with procedural arguments, but underneath every legal phrase sat something deeply personal and poisonous. Opposing counsel painted me carefully, layer by layer, into someone unrecognizable. A manipulative daughter, a woman who abandoned her family, a military officer with suspiciously incomplete records. At one point, the attorney, a polished man named Richard Vance, held up copies of my service history. Your Honor, he said smoothly. Significant portions of Major Bennett's alleged military accomplishments cannot be independently verified. Alleged. The word echoed through the room. I felt heat crawl slowly up my neck. Evelyn remained calm beside me, occasionally making notes while Vance continued. We are simply asking whether the defendant has exaggerated or falsified elements of her identity for financial gain. Financial gain. As though 20 years of military service had been some elaborate inheritance scam. The judge, Harold Whitmore, listened carefully, without revealing much emotion. He was older, probably late 70s, with the kind of face that looked carved from stone. The only thing soft about him were his eyes, and even those looked tired. When court recessed for lunch, I escaped into the hallway near the vending machines, needing air that didn't feel poisoned by accusation. That's where my father found me. You should settle, he said. I turned slowly. What? You heard me. He spoke quietly, almost casually, as if discussing whether instead of dismantling my life. Give Jake the house. Walk away clean. I stared at him in disbelief. You're doing all this for money? For family? He didn't flinch. You accused your mother of cheating on you. His jaw tightened. That woman poisoned this family against me for years. The way he said that woman instead of your mother made something inside me finally crack. She loved you, I whispered. No, he snapped. She lied to me. For a moment I saw it. Not anger. Something worse. Humiliation. The kind men never admit, but spend their lives defending themselves against. My father leaned closer. You think those medals make you important, he said quietly. You're still just a girl who ran away. I should have answered, but I didn't, because I realized something worse than hatred. He didn't see me as a daughter at all anymore. He saw me as proof that he had failed. Back inside the courtroom, the moment Evelyn placed the sealed federal envelope on the evidence table, finally introduced the sealed federal envelope. It wasn't loud, and the moment the Pentagon insignia hit the light, it was worse than that. The entire room changed silent in a way that felt intentional, like even the air was waiting. Vance frowned immediately. Your Honor, what exactly is that supposed to be? Evelyn didn't look at him. You'll find out when you're allowed to. My father let out a short, disbelieving laugh. This is ridiculous. You people are treating her like she's... Mr. Bennett, the judge interrupted sharply. Even that one sentence changed him. The courtroom noticed it too. Judge Whitmore leaned forward slightly, his eyes fixed on the envelope. Where did you obtain this? He asked. Evelyn answered calmly. Federal storage authorization. Military chain of custody. That word, military, hit the room harder than anything else said so far. The judge extended his hand. Open it. Evelyn stepped forward. The envelope seal cracked softly. That sound alone felt too loud. Inside were documents. Multiple pages. Classified markings. Redacted sections. Official stamps layered like warnings. The judge read the first page. Then stopped. Then read it again. His expression changed so slowly it was almost unsettling, like realization arriving late but fully formed. He adjusted his glasses. Then removed them. No, he muttered under his breath, like he didn't believe what he was seeing. Vance leaned forward. Your Honor, if this is an attempt to introduce... Quiet. The word wasn't loud, but it cut through him anyway. The judge continued reading. A full minute passed without anyone speaking. Even the reporters stopped shifting in their seats. Finally, Judge Whitmore looked up. His voice was different now. Heavier. This court is going to pause all proceedings. My father sat forward immediately. Pause. For what? This is a family dispute. The judge turned toward him slowly. It stopped being a family dispute the moment you filed false declarations referencing federal service records you had no right to challenge. That sentence landed like a door locking shut. My father blinked. What are you talking about? The judge looked back at the documents. Then at me. Major Scarlett Hayes, he said carefully. Your service includes operations under protected diplomatic clearance. Portions of your record fall under federal classification. A whisper ran through the courtroom. My father stiffened slightly. That's impossible. She's just. Just what? The judge cut in. Silence again. The judge continued reading, slower now, as if each line carried weight he didn't want to misstate. Confirmed deployment coordination. Civilian extraction support. Foreign operational assistance under Joint Task Authorization. Each phrase made the room feel tighter. Jake leaned back in his seat, visibly uncomfortable now. My father wasn't looking at me anymore. He was staring at the envelope like it had insulted him personally. Then the judge said the part that changed everything. Any further claims questioning Major Hayes' identity or legitimacy of service will be considered interference with federally protected material. My father snapped. So, what? She's untouchable now. The judge looked directly at him. No, he said quietly. But you are accountable for what you filed. That word, accountable, finally landed. My father went still. For the first time, I saw something behind his eyes shift. Not anger. Fear. But it wasn't fear of me. It was fear of consequences he didn't understand anymore. Evelyn turned slightly toward me, voice low. This isn't over yet. The judge raised his hand again. And there is something else, he said. The courtroom held its breath. These filings include documented evidence that Mr. Thomas Bennett previously attempted to alter paternity records through county submission irregularities. A wave of confusion spread instantly. Vance flipped through papers quickly. That's not relevant. It is when it's fraud. The judge replied coldly. My father stood up abruptly. That's not true. But his voice cracked slightly at the end. And that small crack was louder than everything else he had said in this entire case. The judge looked at him for a long moment, then spoke again. This court is now placing a hold on all estate-related claims pending federal review. A gavel struck once. Final. And in that sound, something in my father finally broke. Quietly, completely, without ceremony. He wasn't shouting anymore. He wasn't accusing. He just sat down slowly, like the strength had left him all at once. And for the first time since this began, I didn't feel like I was standing on trial anymore. The silence after the gavel didn't feel like an ending. It felt like pressure. Like the whole courtroom was holding its breath and didn't know when it was allowed to breathe again. My father sat frozen in his chair, hands resting loosely on the edge of the table in front of him. For the first time, he didn't look angry. He looked uncertain, like the ground under him had finally stopped obeying him. Jake kept glancing between the judge and my father, his face pale now, as if he was only just realizing he was sitting in something much bigger than a family dispute. Vance leaned back slowly, closing the file in front of him. For once, he had nothing to say. Judge Whitmore spoke again, quieter now. This court will reconvene after federal review officers finalize documentation verification. Then he looked at my father. Mr. Bennett, you are not to leave the jurisdiction. That sentence hit harder than the gavel. My father opened his mouth slightly. Am I under arrest? No, the judge said. A pause. Not yet. That not yet hung in the air like a warning no one wanted to translate. The bailiff stepped forward, and just like that, the courtroom started to break apart in controlled confusion. People whispering, reporters already typing furiously, chairs scraping, footsteps echoing. But I didn't move. For a moment, I just stood there. Because I realized something strange. The fight wasn't screaming anymore. It had changed shape. Evelyn stepped beside me quietly. Stay ready, she said. This phase is where people panic and make mistakes. I looked at her. Including him? Her eyes shifted toward my father. Yes, she said simply. Especially him. Across the room, my father finally stood up again. But slower this time. Not like someone in control.